Hello and welcome to this course. One of the hardest challenges that beginner motion designers face is the graph editor. They are often scared of it because they think it is too hard to understand. But for creating a great motion piece, mastering the timing and spacing is crucial. Therefore, I invite you to join me on this course. At first, we will learn about keyframes and spacing. Then, we will create those keyframes in After Effects using a fake graph. We will learn about the value and speed graphs. Then we go towards the practice section. We will create a fake 2.5 box rotation with the value graph, as well as we create a fake 3D bow rotation with the speed graph. This is a course from my After Effects Basics series. If you are new to After Effects, I highly encourage you to watch the beginner's guide to Adobe After Effects first. By the end of this course, you should be able to work with the graph editor and you will understand to create a fake 2D or 3D animations in After Effects. For the class project, the students can animate a ball or create a fake house rotation using a speed and value graph. Once again, welcome. Let's start. If you are a self-taught motion designer like me, you would have definitely tried recreating many animations in order to learn how it was done. In my early learning days, no matter how hard I tried to match the movement of elements with the original design, there would always be a huge gap in the quality. Much later, I learned that though I was giving enough attention to timing, the magic element that I was not paying enough attention to was spacing. Motion design is all about mastering how one object moves from point A to point B. The great animator Norman McLaren said, "Animations are not the art of drawing that moves, but the art of movements that are drawn. What happens between each frame is more important than what exists in each frame." To understand the concept of timing and spacing, we need to have a strong foundation of basics of animation. So let's begin with understanding what is animation. Animation can be defined as management of set of still images at a certain speed to generate the illusion of movement. Now, let's take an example to understand the concept better. In this footage, the circle moves from point A to point B in 1 second with a linear motion at the rate of 20 frames per second. In a linear motion, the distance between each frame is the same, but in the real world, objects do not move in a linear motion. Now, there are 4 types of spacing, and they are linear, easy in, easy out, and easy ease. Linear spacing will have the frames spaced in equal distance. In simple words, the animation will happen at a constant velocity. Ease-in spacing can be used at any frame that needs to be slowed down. Basically, any frame that needs to be deaccelerated or stopped. In this style, the frames are placed closer at the end and they are spaced far at the beginning of the animation. Now, about the ease-out spacing, it is the opposite of easy-in style. It is used at frames that needs to be accelerated. Here, frames are placed closer at the beginning of animation and far during the end of the animation. Easy ease spacing is a combination of easy in and easy out. Hence, this will be used when the elements needs to be accelerated and deaccelerated as well. Here, the frames are placed closer at the start as well as at the end, but they are further apart in between animations. Now, to understand and work with the graph editor, we need to have a good knowledge of the tools available for the editing the graphs. And in the next video, we are going to do that. Okay, so we are inside of Adobe After Effects, and now that we are familiar with types of keyframes, we are going to create a sort of fake graph that we can practice graph editors on it better. So I have a solid layer in here, and it is just made with gradient ramp and vignette effect. So okay, now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to select my pen tool and let's change its stroke to 12 pixels, and then I'm going to draw a line like this. So let's just press the enter on the layer and rename it to graph editor. And also let's press Y to go towards our anchor points, and let's set the anchor point to the middle. And now I select my layer, and then on Effects and Preset tab, I'm going to type Echo. And I will grab the echo effect and I will apply it to my layer. Now the echo effect basically combines frames from different times in a layer. My composition right now is set on 12 frames per second, and I want 24 of these lines in order to stimulate each frame. So let's change the number of echoes to our composition frame rate, which is 24. So I will set the numbers to 23, and with the one I have in here, we will have 24 frames. Now on the next step, I'm going to press P to bring position, and then I'm going to set a keyframe on 0. And then exactly on 1 second, which is 24 frames, I'm going to move the line towards the right. Now we have to apply a simple formula for echo time in order to make everything work properly. The formula is -1 divided by your comp frame rate. So let's go towards the calculator and let's write -1 divided by 4. So I'm going to copy the first 4 digits, and After Effects just turned it into 42. Now select the keyframes and then let's use the arrow keys to adjust it. Now let's count the lines to see if they are correct. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 2, 24. Okay, now to demonstrate it better, let's go towards our shape tool and let's select the ellipse tool. Let's set the fill on white and let's turn off the stroke. And I'm going to hold shift to create a circle like this. Okay, now let's just rename it to circle. Now let's press U to hide the keyframes and let's parent the circle to graph editor. So it follows the movement, but first let's move it in here. So I'm going towards my circle layer and then I'm going towards my anchor point tool by pressing Y, and then I'm going to adjust it. So let's turn on our snapping in order to snap it to the middle faster, and then I'm going to move the circle to here, and then I'm going to parent it to the graph editor. So it follows the graph. Right now if you watch, because you don't have to play it, and I will show you in a second how it works. Right now our keyframes is set to linear spacing. Now let's go to the fun part. If I press F9, as you see, the graph changed. Take a look at circle and how it moves now. As you see, we have more keyframes at the beginning, and then the spacing is equal at the middle, and again at the end we have few keyframes close to each other. Now in order to go towards the graph editor, you need to click on this icon in here, or we can press Shift plus F3. Now there are two types of graph, value and speed, and you can select them in here, and by default the graph editor is set on value. Let's change it to speed graph, and let's talk about the speed graph first. Now when I click on the graph editor, two yellow rectangles appeared on each side, and they represents our keyframes. So for example, if I click on this one, then I exit my graph editor. As you see, it selected the first keyframe. Now for example, if I select this one and I click on it, as you see, the right rectangle now is highlighted. Now this is the speed graph, and the vertical section shows the speed of a layer per frame, where the horizontal line shows the time. As you see, if I hover on it, it says pixel per second. So now if I move my time indicator towards 1 second where our animation finishes, Now if I select the first keyframe and then I start to pull it towards right, our object starts to gain speed over time, and therefore there will be more keyframes at beginning where our layer starts to accelerate to here, which is now at its highest speed. As you see, at the middle our circle moves really fast because the line is at its highest speed. So let's watch the animation. And now if I start to pull the right handle towards the left, now let's see what happens. As you see in here, where our speed graph is at its maximum speed, there is less keyframes here. So let's zoom in a bit so you can see it better. And at the end, where the speed gets low or deaccelerates, we will have more keyframes. So this is how the speed graph works in After Effects. But before we move to value graph, let's see how other keyframes will affect the speed graph. So let's select the graph editor layer and let's press F9 to turn them into standard easings. So the first one is the linear speed, and you can do that by simply hovering over your keyframes and then holding your control key and then pressing on one keyframe. As you see, the distance is equal as we have talked about it before. Now let's try the easy ease out. As you see, we have graph like this where we have more keyframes at the beginning of our animation. Okay, now let's apply easy ease in to see how it works. Now as you see, we have more keyframes at the end, so the animation is a bit faster at the end. And the next one is just standard easings. So now what you will realize that our standard easing is made up by an easy out and easy in keyframe. Okay, now let's move towards the value graph. Okay, now let's talk about the value in Graph Editor. If I press U to reveal keyframes and then I apply standard easings, as you see, our graph is set to speed. So we can go towards choose graph type and options, and we can change it to value graph. As you see, on the first look, it might be complicated, especially if you have never used value graph before. So the red line on here represents the X position for position value, and then the green line shows our Y value. Now, there is one important thing to remember when you are working with value graph, and that is the value graph can't work while the X and Y value are not separated. Right now, as you see, when I click on X value, I don't have any handles to move or do any kind of edit on my keyframes. And that is because our position value are not separated. Well, to fix it, either you can right click on values and then select separate dimensions, or on your graph editor, you can click on this small icon in here. Now, as you see, we have numbers in red and green, which they represent our X and Y value. Right now, as you see, the Y value is set on a straight line, which is true because we are moving on the straight line and there is no movement in Y position, and we are going to remove it since we don't need it. Now if I press F9 to apply standard easings, as you see, now we have two handles that we can tweak it. Now, unlike the speed graph where the curves were used to indicate the speed, here what we call the steepness shows how an object moves over time. So if I move the bottom handle towards left, as you see, it affects the end of our keyframes. Where I start to create slope, as you see, it affects the beginning of our animation. So this is something that I want you to practice and get used to it. So the steepness is the key to our value graph editor. Right now, as you see in here, the line is starting to get sharper and it affects the keyframes, which leads to we have less lines in this frame. Okay, now it is time to start our first practice video. Now, in this practice, we are going to focus on creating a 2.5 dimension or a fake 3D animation, and we are going to use only value graph to do this practice. So the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to parent related objects in order to create a strong rig. So when you are animating in After Effects, always keep this tip in your mind: how an object moves and why it moves and how it affects other parts of an animation. Most of the time, when you are moving an object, other properties or at least another object moves with it as well. So let's select front layer and let's change its color to yellow. And now let's give the background a brown color. And now let's lock it, and then let's activate the shy function, and lastly let's hide it. Now let's connect the side layer to front by using the parenting in After Effects. So let's select the side and then let's parent it to the front using the pick whip in here. Now let's parent the top one to the front as well. And also I'm going to parent the arrows to front. And lastly, I'm going to parent the barcode to this side. So the way we are going to animate is that we are going to move the side layer from our right side to the left. Okay, so let's move our time indicator to 1 second. And the reason I usually start on 1 second is because if I need to offset something, I can see the keyframes. And this time, instead of going towards transform panel and then setting a keyframe on position, I'm going to press Alt plus Shift plus P simultaneously to set a keyframe. Now I'm gonna move half second forward, which is 12 frames, and then I'm going to move it towards the middle. Also, we need to move the side layer beneath the front layer in order to hide it. Okay, that is good, but we also need to move the barcode layer as well. Now it is time to reveal it. Now if I move the layer, let's say towards the left, as you see the edges doesn't match. So let's press Ctrl plus Z twice to undo our actions. So let's select the side layer and let's duplicate it by pressing Ctrl plus D, and let's rename it to left side. So when it is in here, first we'll cut the beginning of it by pressing Alt plus left bracket key, so we don't see the layers at the beginning. So let's press U to reveal keyframes and let's remove them. And let's set a keyframe on 1.5 seconds. And moving towards 2 seconds, I'm going to move it in here. And now let's right click on the left side layer, and in transform panel, I'm going to select flip horizontal. And that will flip our layer, and then we are going to adjust it. Okay, let's watch. Great. Now when our side moves from right to left, I'm going to increase the shadow width. But if I go towards front, if I highlight it, as you see, all of the shapes are combined in one layer, and I really can't do anything since I don't have any shape modifier in here. Well, to fix this problem, it's fairly simple. All you need to do is that right click on your layer and then in create menu, select 3 shapes from vector layer. Now as you see, After Effects hit my layer and created shapes from the original layer. Now if I go towards the content menu, we see each shape in different groups. Now I am going to select group 1, and in path 1, if we select it, we can change it by pressing Ctrl plus T. But as you see, we can't go further than this square. And it's because in group 1 we still have few path remains. So I'm going to select group 1 and then in the search bar in here, I'm going to search for path. Now, on 1 second, I'm going to set a keyframe for each one of them. Now, this shape layer designed very bad. I don't know if it's a glitch or something else, but sometimes it happens and it's okay. So we go on 2 seconds and then we press Ctrl plus T, and then I'm going to adjust it like this. So let's go towards the second path to see if it's correct one. Okay, as you see, it is not, so we are going to remove the keyframe. Same as the third one. Okay, so let's adjust it for the last one. Okay, also what I'm going to do, let's close these panels. I'm going towards the transform panel and then I'm going to change its opacity. Okay, right now we have the basic animation that we need to work on it in order to make it better. Okay, so far we have this animation. Now it is time to add a squash and a stretch. So let's go towards 1 second and let's select front outlines and let's change its color. And we don't need this front Illustrator file, so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to hide it for now. Now if I press Alt plus Shift plus S, I will set a keyframe. Now let's turn off the chain option, and as you see, we need to adjust a few things. So I'm going to press Y to select my anchor point tool, and then I'm going to move the anchor point down. Okay, now it's better. However, we need to fix the parenting. So I'm going to parent these two to front outline. Okay, so let's just change the front outline color. Right now it overlaps with the original color. Now I'm going towards 1.5 seconds, and then I'm just going to set it on 82. And when our time indicator is almost in here, I'm going to cut the side layers by pressing Alt plus open and close bracket key. Okay, now let's just adjust it. And now when it's on 2 seconds, I'm going to put it on 100 again. Okay, so this is our squash and stretch, but still, in order to make a fake movement, I'm going to add 2 position keyframes. So let's set a keyframe. Now in here, let's move this one. Okay, we need to parent the left side first. So let's parent the left side to the front, and now I'm going to move it towards the middle. Well, something like this. Okay, we have the basics. Now it is time to fix the grabs, which we'll do in the next videos. Okay, now the important part. It is time to adjust the value graph now. So the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to select front outline, and then I'm going to press S to reveal keyframes. And then I'm going to select keyframes by clicking on scale on here, and then I'm going to press F9 to apply easings to them. Now let's press Shift plus F3 to go towards our graph editor. And then I want you to set your graph on the value graph for this practice. Now from this distance to this one,
is our first and second keyframe, and from here to here is our second to third keyframe. Now I'm going to select the second keyframe and then I'm going to pull it towards the left side. Now I can work better in the graph editor if I zoom in properly. So I'm going to click on this icon that says fit all graphs to view. Okay, now let's select the first keyframe and push it towards right. We have two lines because of the X and Y value, so we need to pull both of them. As we have talked about it earlier, the steepness shows how an object is gonna move in the graph editor. So for example, if I pull it all the way to the left, as you see, it is going to be fast, and in my opinion the movement becomes unrealistic. So let's fix the third keyframe. Okay, let's set it to something in here. Okay, so the way I'm going to adjust the graph now is that I'm going to use the middle yellow square as my starting point, and then I will move the lines by 3.5 black rectangle. Okay, that is good, but still we need to work on a few things. So I'm going to exit from my graph editor, and then I'm going to select the side. Right now, as you see, the edges doesn't match, and that is because we parented this side into a wrong layer. So if I select the side layer, and now let me tell you about an important thing in here. When you parent something, do it first or do it before any keyframe. Let me show you what I mean. For example, if I now parent the side layer when the time indicator is almost in the middle of our animation, now as you see, the shape just went above. So let's press Ctrl Z and then let's just parent it before any animation starts. Now let's parent it to the front outlines. Now as you see, we have fixed the issue that we had before. Now let's hold Ctrl and let's select the side and left side layers, and let's press U to reveal their keyframes. So let's apply standard easing to our position keyframes for the side layer. Now let's press Shift plus F3 to move towards the graph editor, and as I said earlier, when you are working in the value graph for position value, you will need to separate the dimensions. So I'm going to right click and then I'm going to click on separate dimensions. So as you see, our object moving on X value, so we only focus on the X value. So I'm going to select it and then I'm going to press F9 to easy ease, and then I'm going to remove the Y value by clicking on the stopwatch in here. So as we have talked about it before, the steepness is going to show how an object moves. So let's just adjust it in here. And as you see, it is a little bit fast. So let's move it a bit in here. Good. Now let's talk about the free script. As a motion designer, you're only going to use plugins and scripts only to do certain tasks faster. EaseCopy is one of the best scripts that you need to have. Check the video on how to install a script if you don't know how to install one. After that, go towards the window panel and select it in here. As you see, right now when I click on it, it went in here. So I can click on these three lines in here, and then I can select undock the panel in here. And then you can select it and you can move it wherever it turns blue. You can just release it. For this one, I'm going to just place it in here. Now, if I select these two keyframes and then I hit copy in here, it is going to copy the graph that we made for this layer. And now if I click on paste, it is going to paste its easings for this layer. Now as you see, I have the exact same graph for both of my layers, and this is going to save your time a lot. Okay, now it is time to fix the position for our front outline layer. Now if I click on the paste button in here, as you see, it is not going to work because we didn't separate the dimensions. So let's do it. And now let's remove the Y value. Okay, for some reason it didn't work, so let me just find it and use the isCopy function one more time. Sorry. Okay, now the important thing about when you are working with the path keyframes in After Effects. If I select the path animation keyframes and then I go towards the graph editor and then let's just apply standard easings into them. As you see, even when I'm working on the value graph, it shows me the speed graph. And After Effects can't give you value graph for the path keyframes, and this is because of the software and how it works. So it's okay. So let's just increase the influence for each handle to 50%. Now let's just select keyframes and let's paste the easings to here. Okay, so let's exit the graph and do it one more time. Now, as you see, here is our final result. So working with the value graph is fairly simple. You just need to watch the curves and those curves will decide how your animation is going to be. In the next example, we will learn how to create a loop for our animation. Right now, let's take a quick break and then we move towards the speed graph.
Okay, welcome to the second practice video. In this video, we will learn how we can create a bouncing ball using the speed graph. So let's select the rope and then let's right click on it, and then in create menu, let's create a shape from it. And I don't need the layer, so let's just hide it by using the shy function in here. Now if I navigate through the content and then I select the path option, and if I hold shift and I click on it, as you see, my path consists of two rectangles. So I can't create the bounce that I want. So let's go towards our pen tool and then let's hold Ctrl plus Alt and let's add a point in middle of the rope. And at the same time, I will hold shift, so in that way I can only move the rectangle on X axis. Now if I go towards my selection tool by pressing V, as you see I can select this point and then I can change it. Okay, now it is time to redesign the ball. In order to make a 3D ball rotation, we need to add a CC sphere effect into it. So let's start with a solid layer. And now let's move it beneath so we can see other layers. And now in here, let's activate the proportional grid. Now let's go towards our effects and preset tab and let's add a fill effect. Now let's use eyedropper tool and let's get the yellow color from our ball. And also let's move it in here. And now let's duplicate it one more time and now let's adjust it like this. And now let's get the blue color as well. And we need to combine these two layers into one in order to add CC sphere effect into it. So let's pre-compose it by pressing Ctrl plus Shift plus C and let's call it ball. And lastly, let's go towards effects and preset tab and let's add a CC sphere effect into it. So now we have this 3D sphere which we need to turn it into 2D design. So let's turn off the proportional grid. Now let's go towards the shading section and let's set ambient to 100. And I'm going to turn down the other options into 0. Now let's turn down the radius so it matches the original design. Now let's just place it in here. Now let's delete the ball layer. Now the way we are going to animate it later on is that if we go towards the rotation section, we can change the Y value in order to make the fake rotation that we want. Now, there's one important thing that I need to mention. If I write path in the search bar in here, and then I animate the path, if I hold shift, I can manipulate path like this, but it might be hard for some of you to do it, so there's actually a better way to do it. So for this step, you need to have After Effects 2019 or above installed on your computer. Go towards the window panel and select Create Nodes from Path Script. And let's move it in here. And now if I select my path keyframes and then I click on the points that follow the nodes, now After Effects turned each small rectangle into a node that we can control it by using the transform property. So since we don't need these two, I'm going to delete it. However, I'm going to change the middle node name into the middle controller. Okay, now we are ready for the next step. Okay, now it is time to animate the ball in this video. As you see, when I select the ball composition, a purple rectangle appears around the comp, which shows the size of our ball comp. And right now, it is really big. So if we go towards the ball composition, and if we right click on it and then in composition settings, I'm going to change it to 150 by 150. So in that way, I can move my ball layer better. So the next step that I'm going to do is that I'm going to move the ball towards middle. And we can do that by going into Align tab as well. So let's make sure that the pins and rope layers are aligned to the middle as well. So now let's parent the ball layer into middle controller node. So in that way, if I move the node, the ball moves with it as well. So let's start at 1 second. So the way the ball moves is that it is going to build some energy by going down, and then the ball releases itself, swings at the air, and then gets back to its original position. So let's set a keyframe on 1 second. And then we move 5 frames forward by pressing page down, and then I'm going to drop the ball by 75 units. So I'm going to write plus 75. So 5 frames forward, I'm going to add minus 75 units. Also, I need to add another minus 75 units in order to set the ball into its original position. So I'm going to write minus 150. But now let's adjust the ball and let's snap it to the rope. Now let's press Ctrl plus Shift plus D to make a duplicate of our ball layer. However, when you press this shortcut, After Effects is going to cut the end and the beginning of these layers. Now we are going to remove the parenting for the second node, so we can push it up. Now let's set a keyframe on it by pressing Shift plus page down, and then we go 10 frames forward and then we push it up. And 10 frames forward, I'm going to put it back to its original position. Now, when our ball goes up, we need to add an elastic effect to our rope. So let's move 5 frames forward and let's just copy and paste the first keyframe in here. This time, let's just add 50 units into it. Now again, 5 frames forward, I'm going to remove 100 frames from it. 50 for the middle and 50 for the rope. And 5 frames forward, I'm going to copy and paste the first keyframe. And now I'm going to add 25 units this time. Now, alternatively, I'm going to copy and paste first keyframe to get a loop. Now, in order to have a perfect loop, you need to cut your animation one frame before it ends. Okay, so in this video, we are going to apply easings to our keyframes. So let's apply standard easings by pressing F9. So let's double click on the first keyframe and then let's change the influence to 10%. And let's set these two to 90%. And now let's adjust the rest like this. Now let's apply easings for our ball position in Graph Editor. Let's just set the first keyframes on 10%. Sorry, I accidentally selected all of my keyframes instead of one. Also, let's set the third one on 10%. Okay, however, we need to adjust the ball because it stops at the wrong place. Okay. Now we need to adjust it a bit, so let's increase the influence a bit. Alright, all done. Okay, now that we have this animation, there's one thing that we can do in order to make it better. So when the ball reaches at its highest, it stops, and we need to fix that. So let's select the position keyframes and in the Graph Editor, and then let's double click on the middle keyframe, and now let's turn on the box that says continuous look outgoing to incoming. Now in that way I can grab middle keyframe and push it up a bit. So the speed will be around 260 pixels, and it is too much, so let's decrease it. Now it is time to add a squash and stretch. Now let's press Alt plus Shift plus S to set a keyframe. And now let's turn off the chain option. And when the rope goes down, let's squash it. So in order to make a better squash and stretch in After Effects, if you add a value to a parameter, remove the same value from the other one. So for example, I removed 50 units from the Y value, and then I'm going to add the same amount to the X value. Okay, now in here, we are going to turn it into its real form. Now in here, let's set a keyframe. So when it's up, let's just, stretch it. And let's turn off the chain option. So let's add a number to something like 120 and let's remove it from the X value. And then when it goes down, we bring it back to its original form. Okay, let's apply easings to them. Now let's go towards the graph editor and let's adjust the graphs. And I'm going to click on fit graphs. And then I'm going to give it the 52% influence on each side. Something like this should be fine. Okay, but also we can exaggerate the movement a bit. We can go on 80 and 120. Also, there's nothing wrong with breaking a rule in here, so let's just push it a bit further. Okay, now it is time to animate the rotation for CC sphere effect. So let's go towards the rotation and let's set a keyframe on Y value. And when our animation is over, I'm going to rotate it by 180 degrees. And I'm going to press U to bring up its keyframes, and then I'm going to apply standard easings into it. Now let's press Shift plus F3 to go towards our graph editor and let's adjust it. So let's watch the final result. As you see, it looks much better now.